I want you to imagine a scenario for a second.
Okay.
Picture a society that is just like absolutely obsessed with wealth. We are talking about a culture experiencing this unprecedented economic boom.
Right, like a true golden age of expansion.
Exactly. But beneath that glittering surface, the society is actually quietly drowning in debt.
Yeah.
And the legal system is totally rigged in favor of the rich.
Oh, wow. Yeah, where you can basically buy a judge if you have enough capital.
Right. And corporate interests are just swallowing up family-owned properties without a second thought. And here's the kicker. Despite this massive structural inequity, everyone goes to their place of worship on the weekend.
Like clockwork.
Yep. They sing the songs, they drop their money in the offering plate, and they leave completely convinced that everything is, perfectly fine. They think God is entirely on their side.
Wow. Does that sound at all familiar to you? Because it sounds incredibly, perhaps uncomfortably modern.
I mean, it really does.
You're describing a culture that has completely severed its public ethics from its private piety. It's a society where people basically believe they can purchase moral immunity just by, showing up to a religious service.
And that right there is the exact mission of this deep dive.
Yeah.
Because we are exploring the Book of Amos today.
Yes.
Which is, it's an 8th century BCE text that serves as this blistering, dangerously relevant critique of that exact thing, institutionalized righteousness that is actually masking hidden injustice.
It really is. And we are drawing today from a really fantastic source document, which is a comprehensive academic and theological survey of the Book of Amos by Chris R. Velazquez.
Yes, it's a great paper.
And what Velazquez does so well is he doesn't just treat this as, a piece of ancient religious poetry. He puts it under a microscope. So we're going to look at this through historical analysis, archaeological evidence.
Stuff that's literally been dug out of the dirt.
Exactly. Dug out of the dirt. Plus the brilliant literary structure of the text itself, and of course its theological shockwaves.
Right. Because the layers here are what make this text so explosive.
They really do. When you stop treating the Book of Amos as just a dusty collection of ancient sayings, and you start looking at the geopolitical and economic engines running in the background, it transforms.
It becomes one of the most sophisticated social critiques in human history.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because I think the fundamental question for you listening right now is, who is this guy Amos?
Correct.
And why does his message from the Iron Age still feel so aggressively targeted at us today?
It's a great question.
Like, how on earth did an ancient herdsman perfectly describe the social dynamics of an advanced, wealthy, highly stratified society?
Well, to understand the man, you have to understand the specific geopolitical moment he was walking into. We are looking at the mid-8th century BCE.
Okay. Set the scene for us.
So the political landscape of the region is divided into two sister nations. You have the northern kingdom, called Israel, which is ruled by King Jeroboam II. And you have the southern kingdom, Judah, ruled by King Uzziah. Now, for Israel in the north, Jeroboam's reign is a massive golden age.
But why then? I mean, what changed in the world to suddenly make them so wealthy out of nowhere?
It all comes down to the regional superpower, which was the Assyrian Empire. They were going through this period of internal weakness and decline.
Oh, so they backed off.
Exactly. Because the Assyrians pulled back, Israel was able to flex its military muscle, expand its borders, and most importantly, they took control of the major international trade routes.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so the wealth flowing through the Levant suddenly funneled directly into Samaria, which is the capital of Israel. They went from being this, modest subsistence farming nation to a massive cash crop export economy practically overnight.
Wow. But there's always a catch with that kind of rapid economic pivot, right? Like, golden ages usually only feel golden if you're the one holding the gold.
That is so true.
Because if you're transitioning from small family farms to a massive export economy, somebody has to lose their land to make room for those mega farms.
And that is the tragic underbelly of Jeroboam's golden age. This sudden influx of international wealth intensified class stratification to an absolute breaking point.
The rich got richer and the poor got poorer.
Exactly. The elite urban class was getting incredibly rich, while the rural farmers were being systematically impoverished. You had wealthy landowners consolidating small farms into massive estates, courts being bribed to look the other way.
Which we'll definitely get into later.
Oh, yes. Extreme debt pressure and literally the commodification of human beings. And into this hyper-wealthy, incredibly unequal society walks our guy, Amos.
And Amos is, not who you would expect to be delivering a national keynote address on ethics.
Not at all.
He's not a politician. He's not even a professional prophet with institutional backing. He is a total outsider.
Yeah, he's from a tiny, rugged town called Tekoa.
Right, which is in the southern kingdom of Judah, about 12 miles south of Jerusalem. So he's essentially walking across the border, leaving this harsh, rocky terrain of the south and entering the lush, prosperous north.
Just to tell them their entire economic system is a moral abomination.
Which is such a bold move.
It really is. And his occupational background is the key to his entire critique here. The original Hebrew text uses two very specific words to describe what he does for a living.
Okay, let's hear the Hebrew.
First, he is a nuqued, which means a sheep breeder or a herdsman. And second, he is a buchelashikim, which translates to a dresser or keeper of sycamore figs.
Okay, sheep breeder makes total sense to me.
Yeah.
But what is a dresser of sycamore figs? Because I always picture someone putting little outfits on fruit.
I know, it sounds so weird in English, but it's actually a highly specialized, grueling form of agricultural labor.
Really?
Yeah. Sycamore figs in that region required a worker to climb the tree and physically pierce or nip each individual piece of fruit a few days before the harvest.
Wait, they had to poke every single fig?
Every single one. That piercing releases a gas that allows the fig to ripen fully and become sweet. You don't pierce them, they stay hard and bitter, and you can't eat them. So it is tedious, manual, blue-collar labor.
Wow. Okay, that context changes everything. Because his working class background gives him the moral credibility to actually critique systemic agricultural exploitation.
Exactly.
Like when he talks about the elites crushing the poor, he knows exactly what that looks like on the ground. He knows how much literal blood and sweat goes into producing the food that the elites are just casually gorging themselves on.
Right. He's not some pampered academic critiquing the system from a comfortable university lounge. He's a laborer who has seen the extraction economy firsthand.
That's fascinating. And his background informs his rhetoric, too. He speaks with this incredible, unpolished clarity, which brings us to the literary strategy in the first two chapters of the book.
Oh, this is my favorite part. It is an absolute masterclass in rhetorical entrapment.
The structure is genius. It reminds me of a brilliant legal maneuver, or even like a stand-up comedian roasting rival cities. It's like a UN prosecutor stepping up to the podium, reading off a list of horrific human rights violations committed by rival nations.
Getting the whole room to nod in solemn agreement.
Exactly. And then suddenly pointing at the home delegation and saying, and you are doing the exact same things to your own citizens.
It's devastating, and the execution of that trap is incredibly deliberate. Amos uses a recurring poetic formula. For 3 transgressions and for 4.
What does that mean exactly?
It's an ancient way of expressing a sin that has overflowed its boundaries, like the cup of wrath is full and spilling over, and he starts by pointing the finger at all the surrounding enemy nations.
Right, he calls out Damascus, Gaza, Tyre, Edom, Ammon, Moab.
Yep, hitting all the rivals.
And he isn't accusing them of minor infractions either. He's indicting them for unspeakable war crimes. I mean, he talks about Damascus using iron-threshing sledges to crush the people of Gilead.
It's brutal.
He talks about Ammon ripping open pregnant women just to enlarge their borders, which is horrifying. But you can just imagine the Israelite audience in Samaria listening to this and cheering him on.
Oh, they would have been thrilled. They are completely validating his message because he is condemning the monsters across the border.
Yeah.
The audience would have felt incredibly vindicated. He's confirming all of their nationalistic biases. He's preaching holy war and doom to their geopolitical rivals. And then he pivots to Judah, their sister nation and rival to the south, and he condemns them too.
And the northern Israelites would have loved that even more. Like, yeah, get Judah too.
Exactly. But then the trap snaps shut. It's the ultimate expectation reversal. Amos turns that exact same formula for 3 transgressions and for 4 directly onto Israel itself.
I can just imagine the crowd going dead silent.
You could hear a pin drop. And what's fascinating here is the theological shift in that moment. It is seismic.
How so?
Well, the 4 nations were condemned for atrocities of war, right? For violating basic international human rights. But Israel is indicted for what we would consider domestic social issues.
Yeah.
They are indicted for economic oppression, sexual exploitation, and debt slavery. Amos says they are selling the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals.
I have to admit, when I first read that, I pushed back a little.
Really?
Yeah. Well, my initial thought was, shouldn't God go easier on his own people? Like, if they are the chosen people, shouldn't they get a bit of a pass on domestic financial corruption compared to the literal war crimes of their neighbors?
It's a very natural reaction to have.
But then I thought about it like this. If a total stranger walks down the street and throws a rock through my front window, I'm angry. I'll call the police. It's a crime.
Right.
But if I come home and find out my own child threw a rock through the window from the inside, my reaction is totally different. The anger is infinitely deeper because there's a relationship there.
That makes perfect sense.
You hold your own family to a higher standard because they know the rules of the house.
That analogy perfectly captures the core theological synthesis of the entire book. In the worldview of the biblical authors, election being chosen by God intensifies responsibility.
It's not a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Not at all. In Amos chapter 3, God essentially says, "You only have I known of all the families of the earth, therefore I will punish you for all your iniquities." Covenant privilege without covenant fidelity guarantees a harsher judgment. They knew the house rules, they had the Torah, they knew they were supposed to care for the vulnerable, and they weaponized the system against them anyway.
And they were weaponizing that system to get insanely rich. Because Amos talks about this ostentatious, sickening level of wealth.
He does.
Which naturally makes me wonder, can we actually see this wealth in the historical record?
Well,
If this society was as rich and corrupt as Amos claims, shouldn't we be able to find hard evidence of it in the ground?
yes, and the dirt confirms the text in ways that are almost eerie.
Oh, I love archaeological validation.
It's amazing. When we look at the archaeological blueprint of this specific period from Velocis's research, we find 4 major discoveries from Iron Age Israel that perfectly align with everything Amos is screaming about.
Okay, let's go through them.
Let's start with the bureaucracy of wealth. We have something called the Samaria ostraca.
Okay, I know ostraca are like broken pieces of pottery used as writing material. But what makes these specific shards so important?
They are essentially the ancient equivalent of corporate tax receipts. Archaeologists found a cache of them in Samaria, the capital, dating right to this 8th century BCE period, right during Jeroboam II's reign.
And what do they say?
What these receipts track are massive shipments of luxury goods, specifically fine wine and highly refined cosmetic oil flowing from the rural countryside into the royal capital.
So it's proof of the extraction economy.
Exactly.
It proves that the wealth of the capital wasn't being generated in the capital. It was being literally sucked out of the surrounding farmland.
Let's dig into the mechanics of how that extraction actually worked, because it explains that selling the needy for a pair of sandals line we talked about.
Yeah, please do, because that line is so stark.
In the ancient world, if a peasant farmer had a bad harvest, he would have to borrow grain from a wealthy urban elite just to survive the winter and plant next year's crop.
Okay, standard loans.
Right. But the collateral for that loan was his ancestral family land. If the next harvest was also bad, he defaulted. The elite landowner seized the property, and the farmer was forced to become a tenant worker on the very land his family had owned for generations.
Oh, it's rough. And what happens if he defaulted again as a tenant worker?
Then the collateral became his own body, or the bodies of his children. They would be sold into debt slavery to pay off the interest.
Oh my God.
So when the Samaria ostraca show all this luxury oil and wine flowing into the capital, we aren't just looking at a healthy trade surplus. We are looking at the yield of massive, consolidated estates run by indentured servants who used to own the land.
That is sickening.
Yeah. Amos is looking at this and saying, you are drinking wine bought with the blood of your own countrymen.
And the luxury they were buying with that blood money was just staggering. Like in chapters 3 and 6, Amos critiques the elites for lounging on beds of ivory and building houses of ivory. For a long time, readers probably thought that was just poetic hyperbole, because nobody literally builds a house out of elephant tusks.
Right. They don't build the structural walls out of it. But excavations in Samaria uncovered the Samaria ivories.
What are those?
Hundreds of beautifully carved, intricate ivory inlays from the 9th and 8th centuries BCE. These would have been imported at astronomical cost from Phoenician craftsmen and set into the wooden furniture and the wall paneling of elite homes.
Wait, I want to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Okay, go for it.
Couldn't you argue that any capital city in the ancient world had luxury goods? Like, why is Amos treating standard royal interior decorating as a mortal sin? Is having nice furniture actually a violation of the covenant, or is he just a disgruntled rural herdsman who hates the big city?
It is a really critical sociological distinction to make. Amos is not unilaterally condemning the concept of wealth. He is condemning wealth that is produced and maintained through systemic covenant violation.
Ah, I see.
He isn't angry that they have ivory. He is enraged by how they acquired the silver to buy the ivory. The the system was rigged. He specifically calls out the corrupt gate courts.
The city gates were where the ancient legal proceedings took place, right?
Yes, the elders would sit at the gates and hear legal disputes. And Amos points out that these judges were taking bribes to deny justice to the poor.
So if a poor farmer tried to sue an elite landowner for predatory lending practices,
The landowner just handed the judge a bag of silver, and the case was dismissed. Amos also condemns the merchants who used false weights and measures. They were literally shaving down the weights on their scales to cheat desperate buyers out of their grain.
wow.
It was a comprehensive, top-to-bottom system of exploitation.
So the ivory beds are really just a physical manifestation of a totally corrupt judicial and economic system.
Exactly.
And Amos's critique is grounded in very real time and space, because there are two major chronological anchors mentioned in the text that tie this to hard science, which absolutely fascinates me.
Oh, the chronological markers are amazing. The first is astronomical.
Let's talk about it.
The Assyrian records, specifically a cuneiform chronicle, record a total solar eclipse in the year, corresponding to 763 BCE.
Wait, really? A specific day?
Yes, NASA and modern astronomers can verify this. It was the eclipse of June 15th, 763 BCE. This grounds the era in hard astronomical time. But think about the psychological impact of that for a second.
Right, because in the ancient Near East, an eclipse wasn't a cool scientific event where you wear special glasses.
No, it was a terrifying omen of divine wrath, the sun just disappearing in the middle of the day. So when Amos uses imagery later in chapter 8, where God says he will make the sun go down at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight, he is weaponizing a recent traumatic memory.
Oh, wow. That imagery wasn't just spooky poetry, it was a visceral terror they had actually lived through.
Exactly.
And the other anchor is geological, right?
Yeah.
Because in the very first verse of the book, Amos says he received these visions 2 years before the earthquake.
Yes. And geological and archaeological studies across several sites in Israel and Judah, places like Hazor and Megiddo, confirm massive destruction layers and deformed walls.
Really, like undeniable proof of an earthquake.
Undeniable. It points to a catastrophic mid-8th century seismic event. It was an earthquake so severe, so traumatizing, that it became a generational marker of time. People dated their lives around it. Oh, that happened 2 years before the earthquake.
That is incredible. Okay, so if the elites were so utterly corrupt in their business and legal practices, cheating the poor out of their ancestral lands while being surrounded by these terrifying omens of eclipses and earthquakes, how on earth did they sleep at night?
That's the real question, isn't it?
How did they justify their own existence? They had to know they were violating the Torah.
They bought their peace of mind through religious rituals.
Wow.
They convinced themselves that God didn't care about the economy as long as the temple was well-funded, and that psychology sets up the central, most explosive lawsuit of the entire book.
I want to set the scene for this because the cognitive dissonance is just wild. We are at the royal sanctuaries of Bethel and Gilgal. These are the premier worship centers of the north.
The biggest ones.
Right. And the elites of Israel are gathered for a massive festival. They are offering incredibly expensive animal sacrifices. They are singing beautiful, elaborate worship songs. They are paying their tithes. By all outward metrics, they are incredibly pious. They believe they are fulfilling their end of the contract.
It was a deeply transactional theology.
What do you mean?
The ancient mindset was often, we feed the gods with sacrifices, the gods give us rain and military victory in return. Since they were currently experiencing a golden age of wealth, they looked at their bank accounts and assumed God was thrilled with them.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. God's response to this massive religious festival, it's in Amos chapter 5, verses 21 to 24, and it is devastating.
Oh, it's one of the strongest passages in the Bible.
God says, I despise your festivals, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps. God is essentially telling them, I am physically repulsed by your church services.
It is the great rejection, and what Amos does here is revolutionary in the history of religious thought.
How so?
He treats social injustice as a theological issue. Liturgy without righteousness is deeply offensive to the divine. The problem isn't that they are singing out of tune. The problem is their hypocrisy.
Right.
They are trying to worship God with hands that are covered in the economic blood of their neighbors.
And to really grasp the mechanics of what Amos is demanding instead of their songs, we need to dive into the original vocabulary. Because there are two crucial Hebrew words that form the absolute core of the prophetic demand here.
Yes, those words are mishat and Tekoa.
Let's break those down because they are constantly paired together in the text.
Mishpa is typically translated as justice or legal order. It's about fairness in the courts, equitable laws, and making sure the systems of society are not rigged to favor the powerful.
Okay. And the other one?
Anakwa is translated as righteousness or right order, but in the biblical context, it doesn't just mean personal, private, moral purity, like, not cursing or not drinking.
Which is how we usually use righteousness today.
Right, but here it refers to the right ordering of relationships within a community. It means doing right by your neighbor, caring for the vulnerable, and ensuring public equity.
I use an analogy to keep these two straight. Think of society as a board game.
Okay, I like this.
Mishugaba means the rules of the game are fair, the dice aren't loaded, the banker isn't stealing from the tray, and everyone gets to roll in their turn.
Right.
But Nadoka is about the players actually treating each other with dignity while they play. You can have perfectly fair rules, but if you're actively trying to humiliate and bankrupt your sister and flip the board, you don't have the Noka.
That is a great way to look at it.
So Amos says, God doesn't want your worship songs if your game is rigged and you're stepping on the other players' throats to win.
That framing perfectly captures it. And Amos is fearless in calling out exactly who is flipping the board. In chapter 4, he delivers what might be one of the sharpest pieces of satire in the ancient world.
Oh, this part.
He addresses the pampered, oppressive, elite women of Samaria and calls them the cows of Bashan.
I honestly laughed out loud when I read that. Calling the wealthiest, most powerful women in the capital city a bunch of livestock is a bold strategy if you want to keep your head attached to your shoulders.
It is intensely provocative. Bashan was a region in the north known for its incredibly rich pasture land, producing the fattest, most prized cattle. And we need to be clear here. This is not an attack on femininity.
Right, it's not about that at all.
No, it is a satirical woe oracle against status, luxury, and blind consumerism.
It actually makes me think of modern supply chains. It's the ancient equivalent of us buying a cheap smartphone or incredibly cheap fast fashion and willfully ignoring the horrific labor conditions or the cobalt mining required to manufacture it.
That's a perfect parallel.
Amos is saying ignorance isn't an excuse.
You hit the nail on the head. Amos says these elites are just lounging around, demanding their husbands bring them more wine, completely oblivious to the fact that their luxury is directly funded by crushing the poor. They are fattening themselves up for a slaughterhouse they don't even realize is waiting for them.
Wow. And that judgment is coming. Amos makes it very clear in chapter 3 that these impending disasters are not random accidents of history.
He uses this rapid-fire series of cause and effect questions, right?
Does a lion roar in the forest when it has no prey? Does a bird fall into a snare on the earth when there is no trap for it?
The underlying logic there is chilling. He's saying when you hear the lion roar, it means the lion has already pounced. The judgment is intelligible. It makes sense.
It was out of nowhere.
Exactly. God had sent previous warning shots, famine, drought, and agricultural blight mentioned in chapter 4, but Israel refused to change course. Because they refused to return to Yahweh, the final disaster is now inescapable.
But let's pause and think about the social dynamics of what Amos is doing in real time.
Okay.
He is a foreigner, a southerner, standing in the capital of a wealthy military superpower, telling the political and religious elites that God hates their worship and is going to wipe their nation off the map.
It's basically suicide.
That is a fantastic way to get yourself thrown in a dungeon or quietly assassinated. How did the establishment react to this guy?
They reacted exactly how entrenched power always reacts. They tried to silence him using the full weight of their institutional authority.
Natural.
And this brings us into the explosive conflict of chapters 7 through 9, which is structured around a series of 5 intense, terrifying visions.
The tension builds incredibly well through these visions. The first 2 visions Amos has are of a locust swarm devouring the crops and a supernatural fire burning up the land.
Terrifying stuff.
And what stood out to me here isn't just the destruction, but Amos's reaction to it. He doesn't just stand there and say, good, burn it down, they deserve it. He actually steps into the role of an intercessor.
Yes, he does.
He begs God to stop. Oh, Lord God, please forgive. How can Jacob stand? He is so small.
It reveals the deep mechanics of prophetic intercession. A true prophet doesn't just speak for God to the people, they speak for the people to God. They stand in the breach.
And remarkably, God relents in those first 2 visions.
It shows that God's default posture is mercy and patience. But that patience has a limit, and that limit is reached in the 3rd vision.
The vision of the plumb line. This is probably the most famous image in the book, but I have to admit I'm a little confused by it.
How so?
Coming off of a plague of locusts and a supernatural firestorm, a builder's string feels incredibly anticlimactic. Like, why is that the vision where God's patience finally runs out?
It feels anticlimactic until you understand what a plumb line actually represents in construction.
Okay, enlighten me.
A plumb line is a simple tool, a string with a lead weight on the end. It relies on the infallible law of gravity to show a perfectly vertical, true line.
Right.
In this vision, God is standing beside a wall holding this plumb line. The metaphor is profound. God is measuring the societal structure of Israel against the true standard of the covenant, against Mishap and Tekoa.
And the wall is bowing out.
Exactly. And any builder will tell you, if a structural load-bearing wall is severely out of plumb, you cannot patch it. You cannot paint over it.
It's unsafe.
The structural failure is terminal. It must be torn down to the foundation before it collapses on the people living inside. That is why the patience runs out. The corruption is no longer just on the surface. It has rotted the structural integrity of the nation.
Wow. It is exactly at this moment of maximum tension, right after the plumb line vision, that the text gives us a narrative break. It's a real-world showdown at the sanctuary in Bethel.
Yes, enter Amaziah.
Tell us about Amaziah.
Amaziah is the high priest of Bethel. He is the guardian of the state religion, deeply embedded with King Jeroboam's administration. He represents the absolute peak of institutional power.
The ultimate insider.
Exactly. And Amaziah confronts Amos, basically telling him, "O seer, go, flee away to the land of Judah, earn your bread there, and prophesy there, but never again prophesy at Bethel, for it is the king's sanctuary, and it is a temple of the kingdom."
Amaziah is basically treating Amos like a paid political lobbyist.
Very much.
He's saying, take your little doom and gloom street preaching act back to the south where someone will pay you for it. You're bad for the economy, and you're upsetting the king.
The mechanics of the ancient religious economy are vital here. Amaziah assumes Amos is part of a prophetic guild.
What's a prophetic guild?
In the ancient Near East, there were court prophets who were essentially paid consultants. The king paid them, so they prophesied victory and prosperity to keep the king happy. Amaziah has a vested interest in the status quo because his power depends on the king's favor.
So Amos's response completely shatters Amaziah's paradigm.
Oh, completely.
Amos says, I am no prophet, nor a prophet's son. He is aggressively rejecting any association with those paid religious yes men.
Right.
Amos is saying, I didn't choose this career to make money. I'm a herdsman. God dragged me from my sheep to tell you the truth.
It's the ultimate clash between institutional credentialing and genuine divine calling.
And because Amaziah rejects the truth and tries to silence the messenger, Amos delivers the fourth vision, which is a masterpiece of Hebrew wordplay that completely gets lost in English translation.
I love when things get lost in translation. Let's hear it.
God shows Amos a basket of summer fruit.
What's the wordplay?
The Hebrew word for summer fruit is quates. And God asks Amos what he sees, and Amos says, a basket of quates. And God responds, the end has come upon my people, Israel.
Where's the pun?
The Hebrew word for the end is quates. Quates and quates, they sound almost identical.
Oh, wow. So it's an auditory trigger. You see the ripe fruit, you hear quates, and it instantly evokes quates, the end.
The fruit is overripe, the harvest is done, the rot has set in, and it's time to throw it out.
The season of divine patience is officially over, and the punishment described in chapter 8 is one of the most terrifying concepts in all of ancient literature. It is the ultimate famine.
Yeah, Amos says the days are coming when God will send a famine on the land, not a famine of bread or a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord.
A famine of hearing the words of the Lord. They had the prophet right there speaking truth to them, and the priest told him to shut up and go home.
For God's punishment is, fine, you want me to be quiet? I will be completely silent.
Think about the mechanics of societal collapse. You can survive a famine of food if you have hope and solidarity, but a famine of truth, a total withdrawal of divine guidance and moral clarity.
That is when a society truly eats itself alive.
Exactly. Which leads us to a fascinating, deeply ironic theological pivot.
What's the pivot?
Amaziah and the elites of Israel weren't worried about societal collapse because they genuinely believed they were on the verge of ultimate triumph. They were eagerly anticipating an event they called the Day of the Lord.
Right, and we need to unpack this concept of the Day of the Lord. Let's talk about their eschatology.
Yeah, eschatology refers to the study of end times or ultimate destinies. The Israelites had a very nationalistic, almost naive eschatology.
In what way?
They believed the day of the Lord meant God was going to dramatically intervene in history, destroy all of Israel's foreign enemies, and bless Israel with unending prosperity. They thought it was a guaranteed payday.
But Amos completely pulls the rug out from under them in chapter 5. He reverses their entire theology. He says, "Alas for you who desire the day of the Lord. Why do you want the day of the Lord? It is darkness, not light."
And the imagery he uses to describe this inescapable judgment is brilliantly bleak. He says it will be like a man who runs away from a lion, only to be confronted by a bear.
Talk about a bad day.
Right. And then he manages to escape the bear. He runs into his house, his safe place. He exhausts himself, leans his hand against the wall, and a snake bites him.
Oh my goodness. It's the horror of escaping one disaster out in the wild, thinking you are finally safe inside your own home, only to find out the ultimate danger was waiting for you in the bedrock of your own house.
Yes.
They thought the day of the Lord was a weapon meant for their enemies. Amos informs them that because of their systemic corruption, they are now the enemies of God.
To really understand the magnitude of this theological shift, we have to zoom out and look at the canonical context.
Meaning how Amos fits into the rest of the Bible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How does Amos fit into the broader library, specifically the collection known as the Book of the 12, or the Minor Prophets?
Right. And as a quick reminder, they're only called minor because of their length, not because their ideas are small.
Exactly. Look at the literary architecture. Amos doesn't exist in a vacuum. In Amos chapter 1, verse 2, the book begins with the phrase, "The Lord roars from Zion." Now, if you look at the book that immediately precedes Amos in the canonical order, the book of Joel, Joel ends his prophecy in chapter 3, verse 16 with that exact same phrase. "The Lord roars from Zion."
Ah, I love that. It's a literary seam. It stitches the two scrolls together.
It creates a unified theological witness. It demonstrates that Yahweh is not some provincial, tribal deity who only manages the borders of Israel and Judah. He is the universal judge. He governs all of world history. From the capital city of Zion, his voice echoes out over every nation on earth, holding them all to the same standard of justice.
Now, since we are talking about the book as a literary structure, we have to talk about how this text actually survived.
Yes, the redaction history.
Because there is a difference between Amos, the historical man standing in Bethel, and Amos, the book that we are reading today.
Critical scholarship recognizes a redaction process here. The book undoubtedly preserves the core historical proclamations of the 8th century prophet, but the final literary form reflects later editorial shaping by scribes and communities in subsequent generations.
And I want to be really clear for you listening here. Understanding that a text was edited over time doesn't undermine its authority.
Not at all.
If anything, it highlights how desperately the ancient community needed to preserve this message. Think about the historical timeline. Amos preaches this in the mid-8th century. Decades later, in 722 BCE, the Assyrian Empire returns, crushes the northern kingdom of Israel, and deports the population.
Exactly as Amos predicted.
Right. The trauma of that collapse was unimaginable. The survivors who fled south to Judah realized, we need to write this down. We need to structure this perfectly so that our kings in the south never forget the plumb line.
It is both historically cautious and canonically serious to recognize that the book is a carefully crafted anthology born out of massive trauma, serving to warn subsequent generations. But the trauma and the judgment are not the final word.
And that's honestly the most surprising part of the book.
It really is.
Because you read 8.5 chapters of unmitigated doom. The altars are smashed, the kingdom is destroyed, the people are facing exile. You assume the message is just, you messed up and now everything is over forever.
But then we get to the epilogue. In the final verses of the book, Amos 9:11 through 15, there is a sudden, profound pivot to hope.
Yeah. After all this inescapable judgment, God makes a promise. He says, on that day, I will raise up the booth of David that is fallen, and repair its breaches, and raise up its ruins, and rebuild it, as in the days of old.
And then it describes this incredible, almost supernatural agricultural abundance, where the mountains will drip with sweet wine, and the people will be securely planted in their land, never to be uprooted again.
It's the promise of restoration.
Yeah.
The booth or tabernacle of David, the royal line that looked like it had been completely annihilated by the judgment, will be rebuilt from the rubble. The remnant will be saved. So what does this all mean for us today? I get why that's a comforting promise for an ancient Israelite facing exile. It's a promise that their nation will survive, But how does a local ancient promise about rebuilding a specific royal house matter to the rest of the world?
If we connect this to the redemptive historical trajectory of the entire biblical narrative, this ending is explosive.
Walk us through it.
Fast forward several centuries to the New Testament. In Acts chapter 15, the early Christian church in Jerusalem is having a massive existential crisis. They are fiercely debating whether non-Jewish people, Gentiles, can be included in the people of God.
Right. Do they have to adopt Jewish cultural and legal practices first, or can they just be welcomed in based on faith?
It was the defining controversy of the early church. It could have split the whole movement in half.
And how did they solve it?
To settle the debate, the Apostle James stands up in the council. And to prove his point, he quotes the Greek translation of Amos chapter 9. He uses the promise of the rebuilt booth of David to argue that the restoration of the Davidic line, which the early church believed was fulfilled in the resurrection of Jesus, was never just meant for Israel.
It was bigger than that.
The restoration of David's throne is the exact specific mechanism for gathering all the nations, all the Gentiles, into the family of God.
That is mind-blowing. Let's look at the mechanics of this chronological hinge. In the very beginning of the biblical story, in Genesis, God makes a promise to Abraham that through his family, all the nations of the globe will be blessed.
Yes, it's a universal global horizon.
Then we get to Amos in the 8th century, and Amos says, "You failed. You hoarded the blessing. Covenant privilege without covenant fidelity brings judgment. The house is falling down."
Right.
But then the final restoration promise in Amos says, "When I rebuild the house, I'm going to build it big enough for everyone." It skips right over the failure and goes back to that original global inclusive promise from Genesis.
It proves that judgment is real. But judgment is not the end of the story. The restoration promise does not cancel the judgment. It is achieved through the judgment.
That's a beautiful way to phrase it.
God's holiness is completely intolerant of hypocrisy and systemic injustice, but his mercy ensures that a remnant survives the fire to become a blessing to the entire world.
So, to summarize this entire deep dive, the book of Amos shows us an 8th century world of immense wealth, luxury, and intense religious fervor.
But it was a society built on a completely rotten foundation of economic exploitation and rigged courts.
Amos proves that God is not fooled by our worship songs if our economic systems are corrupt. He demands Mishita and Fardalkoa fair rules and public dignity.
He shows us that true hope doesn't come from pretending everything is fine while the vulnerable are crushed. True hope lies on the other side of honest judgment.
The book remains enduringly vital because human nature hasn't changed. It continually exposes false religion, it calls leaders to intense moral seriousness, and it insists with terrifying clarity that you cannot separate private piety from public morality.
It's a heavy message, but an important one.
It really is. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought.
Yeah.
It's human nature that when we read a text like this, when we look back at history, we naturally cast ourselves as the heroes of the narrative.
We always do.
We read this book and we instinctively assume we are Amos. We think we are the ones boldly speaking truth to power, holding the line against corporate greed and institutional corruption. But what if we aren't?
What if we are Amaziah?
What if we are the ones sitting in our comfortable, secure institutions, incredibly annoyed by the outsiders who keep telling us that our way of life is built on someone else's suffering? What if we are the ones who think our weekend religious attendance excuses our Monday through Friday economic complicity?
That's a tough pill to swallow.
How do we find the courage to take the plumb line out of Amos's hand and instead of pointing it at our political enemies, hold it up to our own walls? Because if you are living in a society obsessed with wealth, drowning in debt, where the legal system favors the rich, but everyone feels perfectly justified going to their weekend services, you might just be the one Amos is talking to.
Thank you so much for exploring this with me today.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep looking for the vital connections between ancient wisdom and the reality of modern life.